Wrestling. Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Solie, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural edition of the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. And I'm your host, Ray Russell, and that's right, it's 100% territory talk here on the program each and every week, featuring a variety of topics. From event results, we've got special interviews lined up. We'll talk yearly breakdowns of various promotions and eras, deep dives into obscure outlaw promotions, and so much more planned here on the show. And as we launch this program, more often than not, I hope to have special guest co-hosts alongside me to help navigate this fun ride through wrestling history. And we have a very special guest co-host here today, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But a reminder, you can listen to the Regional Rasslin Podcast and our sister shows, including the Wrestling Memory Grenade. Right now over there, it's the 1987 WWF project. We're just coming out of WrestleMania 3. Fun times ahead on the Wrestling Memory Grenade show. Also, our Monday Warfare Raw vs. Nitro program, where we talk the weekly breakdown of WWF Monday Night Raw versus WCW Monday Nitro. Right now, we're smack dab in the middle of the summer of 96. Kevin Nash has just shown up on WCW TV, and we're heading into the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view, where the Outsiders promise to reveal their mystery partner. Who could that be? And you can listen to all of the WrestleCopia brand podcasts on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and everywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Google Pod, and beyond. And be sure to give us a follow on social media so you guys can stay up to date with the goings-on here on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. You can follow us on Twitter at Rasslin Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. You can also follow and like us at Facebook.com/Rasslin Grenade. And not only do we cover all of the latest WrestleCopia news on our social media accounts, but I'm constantly adding new videos and pictures from wrestling history there as well. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can find that over at youtube.com/Rasslin Grenade. I'm always adding new footage as I continue to preserve my VHS collection by converting it all to digital. And when I find something fun, I typically throw it up on YouTube. Always a fun time, so check it out. And speaking of checking things out, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to check out our Patreon account over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That's patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Multiple tiers to choose from, but I recommend the very affordable $5 all-access tier. And what does that tier get you? It gets you all of my insanely detailed show notes from the Wrestling Memory Grenade, Monday Warfare, and now the Regional Rasslin Podcast as well. Plus, you'll receive early access to many of our WrestleCopia podcasts. You can listen days, sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. Plus, part of that all-access tier, enhanced versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show covering 1989 and the NWA, which not only includes enhanced sound quality, but new conversations, original topics that were edited out of the initial broadcasts due to time restraint, edited right back into the show. Plus, you'll receive digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, more digital downloads than ever going up here this holiday season. And of course, rounding out that $5 all-access tier, it's our Patreon-exclusive watch-along series, covering many WWF and WCW pay-per-views, Saturday night's main events, Clash of the Champions, Coliseum videos, and so much more. Plus, coming soon, a very special WrestleMania 3 watch-along. All of that, plus other random extras as well. You get all of that for the low price of just $5. $5, guys. No subscription. Cancel anytime. Give it a go for a month, and I think you'll like the content that we offer, and every penny of it goes right back in to the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. So please help support the brand, help us keep the shows up and running for the months and the years to come. And now, here it is, guys. It's time to go back in time to much simpler days. We're talking pre-national expansion. The territories were booming. Well, most of them anyway. And a couple months ago, I ran a poll on social media with 4 options, asking you guys what you wanted the very first topic to be here on the show. And to my surprise, it was nearly a 4-way tie, which is pretty awesome actually when you think about it. But the winner by 2 votes was 1977 in the WWWF. Yes, we travel back 45 years. Wow. Bruno Sammartino dropping the belt to Superstar Graham. Those pesky executioners looking to regain what they never really lost versus the tag team champions, Chief Jay Strongbow and Billy White Wolf. And as names like Bruiser Brody are winding down their runs here in the company, we'll see a newcomer by the name of Bob Backlund burst onto the scene. Plus, Ken Patera runs roughshod over the competition, and so much more here in 1977 in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And when I made that announcement online, it received a lot of positive feedback, including from our special guest co-host this week, who I'm about to bring on. To paraphrase the good captain, I feel so good, I feel so fine, so proud and so elated to announce as our special guest co-host for this initial episode of Regional Rasslin'. He's often imitated, never duplicated, a man who didn't just live this era, but he loved this era. This right here is the type of stuff that got him in to professional wrestling. So please join me in welcoming Mr. John McAdam to the show. John, welcome to this maiden voyage of the Regional Rasslin' podcast. Happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here. I didn't realize this was going to be a new podcast. I thought this was going to be the Wrestling Memory Grenade, but that's cool. I love the name of that podcast. So even though this isn't the Wrestling Memory Grenade, we're going to unpin this thing. We're going to throw it at you, and there's going to be an explosion of wrestling memories.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. And this actually, this particular episode is going to also act as an episode of the Wrestling Memory Grenade. So you're actually on both shows, John, a double guest at the same time. Have you ever done that
like
before?
2 people.
Yes, it's all an optical illusion, if you ask the captain.
I'll tell you, I'm very happy to do this particular show because 1977 WWF or WWWF is a big deal to me. I became a fan of the sport. I became a hardcore fan like spring, summer of 1976. So this is my first full year as a real wrestling fan, and I'm happy to be here talking about it.
Yeah, and that was the time, right? Like that first full year that we have as fans, man, it just never got any better. I mean, maybe it did get better, but we still have those memories. They live within us forever, really.
Sure, and it was such a different time. I mean, I have this thing, what is it? The Roku player that's half the size of a hockey puck, and it has thousands and thousands of hours of pro wrestling on it, not just from Peacock, but from YouTube and whatever else. Back in the day, I mean, you got 1 hour of wrestling per week, minus commercials, 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. If you missed it, you missed it. No VCRs.
That's right.
And it was almost like, it was almost like less was more because you just looked forward to that hour so much.
Obviously, I got more lucky. I was far more lucky. I grew up throughout all of the 80s, so that's when Vince expanded and had like 40 different TV shows, and Crockett had like 40 different. It was, wrestling fans' dream. You could flip it on ESPN, watch World Class. So there was so much to watch back then. But you're right. When you only have that 1 or 2 hours, if you're watching Championship and All Star, I mean, but that's all you got, plus commercials, obviously. So that was it. And you waited all week for that hour.
Yeah. And I prioritized it. I say I got 1 hour. Then at noon, we had the All-Star show out of Worcester, Mass. But I was lucky if I could just get the audio. I would sit there wrestling with the rabbit ears trying to get this show on Saturday morning. And like I said, I rarely did I get video. Sometimes it was just like listening to the radio. Yeah,
and the millennials and the Gen Zers, they'll never get that struggle. But I, too, even had that issue sometimes as a kid.
Yeah.
So, John, before we get going, I apologize. I should mention John has his own podcast, and I'm sure everybody already knows that. It's the Stick to Wrestling podcast, located over at McAdamPod.com as part of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, John.
Yeah, I'm very proud to be part of the Arcadian Vanguard. The show's been going on for about 4.5 years now. If you like me on this show, you probably want to listen to Stick to Wrestling every week. It comes out every Friday morning. It is a variance of wrestling topics, usually 70s, 80s, and 90s wrestling. And the term stick to wrestling, it's kind of sarcastic. If someone doesn't like what I'm saying, I don't know, politically, they'll stick to wrestling. So that's what I named the show after. But yeah, 95% of it is pro wrestling talk. I think you'll like it.
Yeah, and John always promises to bring you guys a raw bone show and a wicked good time.
There you go.
Absolutely. And you guys can listen, or you guys can follow John on social media, on Twitter at CC Milani. That's CCMILANI, or you can just look up Stick to Wrestling on there. John, you're fairly active on Twitter.
I am. If you search the name John McAdam, just follow the guy with the Stick to Wrestling logo as his avatar. I'd say 80% of it is wrestling, and then you get another 20% of college football and Boston Red Sox, whatever else.
I was going to say, don't forget baseball.
Exactly.
So, John, I guess, are you ready to talk the good old days?
I am. I was born ready to talk the good old days. I'm looking forward to this. 1977, man. The biggest story coming into the year was something that was going on behind the scenes. April 1976, Stan Hansen bounces Bruno Sammartino on his head.
Right.
This thing had to be seen to be believed. They hid it until Bruno passed away. Bruno suffered a fractured vertebrae, and as a result, Bruno was like, I want out of this business. I no longer, don't need him want out of the business, but he no longer wanted to take on the schedule of the WWWF heavyweight champion, and that's the biggest story. Bruno is on his way out.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that in just a minute. Guys, I didn't want to just hit the ground running into 1977 for those unfamiliar with the era. I do something on my grenade show, John, I like to call setting the stage. I just did air quotes, nobody saw them, where we briefly summarize the goings-on heading into the new year. So I saw them. So I wanted to set the stage here by going back and briefly looking at 1976, if that's okay with you.
Oh, yeah.
All right, excellent. So where do we start but where else with wrestling's only living legend, as he was referred to in the WWF? That's Bruno Sammartino, who was, as you just pointed out, the WWWF champion. Well, I'm going to go back and forth this entire episode with 3 W's and 2 W's. So just so
Same
everybody, it's just faster doing it the other way.
It's so much better without the extra W.
It is.
So
it is. In fact, if you want, we can make a pact right now, and we won't hold each other to anything. We'll call it whatever we want throughout this episode.
I'll call it WWF, and the first W is worldwide, all one word.
Okay, sounds great. That makes perfect sense to me. So Bruno Sammartino this was his second time with the title here in the 70s. Now, he won that belt back in December of 73, defeating Stan Stasiak for the belt. Stasiak had the belt a whopping, 9 days with his win over Pedro Morales there. So now that we're coming into 77, that would make Bruno a champion for 3 years. 3 times. That's a long time to be a champion.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Andre and Bruno in 77?
Yeah, really.
Oh, my God.
You know what? I mean, that's been talked about. Should they have done Bruno versus Andre? I say no, because you're kind of messing with the luster of both guys.
Right.
You have Andre undefeated. You've got Bruno the champion. Why ruin it? Why not? They had the storyline. Andre travels the world. He doesn't want to be held down with the burdens of a singles championship.
Right. And at the end of the day, somebody has to lose there. If you're going to pack a house between Andre and Bruno, you're going to have to give somebody a winner. And I feel like you can't do that to either one of those guys in this period.
No, they had Bruno and Pedro. They went to a draw. I think anyone who had watched wrestling for more than 2 or 3 years knew that was going to a draw. The match was supposed to be terrible, and I think Bruno and Andre would have been even worse. I think they did the right thing by keeping those guys away from each other.
Yeah, I agree. So Bruno, at this point, been champion, 3 years? As you just pointed out, he suffered a broken neck at the hands of Stan Hansen earlier in 76. And he's looking to lessen his schedule and lighten his load and go back into what would you call it, semi-retirement here, where Bruno kind of picks and chooses when and where he wants to wrestle.
It's funny. About a year ago, I went back and really looked at Bruno's his career after losing the title to superstar Billy Graham. He did not wrestle very much at all. I was really surprised. I figured, okay, he took it easy, maybe just did weekends and, Madison Square Garden on Monday nights. He didn't even do that. He wasn't even that active for the Larry Zbyszko feud. He wasn't even that active for the rematches against superstar Billy Graham. He cut his schedule way back.
Yeah, it's we'll see that as we go through this year. Bruno still working the big houses, Boston, MSG, and whatnot after his title loss. But by the fall, Bruno's pretty much out of it. Other than he comes back in December and works a date, but Bruno doesn't even really work the final third of this year for the most part.
No, he didn't. And like I said, when I went back and looked at that, I was very surprised.
So, we get things going here. It's kind of important to mention that Bruno and Superstar Graham going into 77 actually already have a history here in the company, because you can go back to the beginning of 76, January and February in Madison Square Garden. It was Bruno defending his title against Superstar Graham. And of course, in January, they had Graham go over Bruno on a count out. Two men collide. Bruno falls through the ropes, takes a bump to the floor, and eats the count out. Graham goes over. They do the rematch in February, this time Bruno going over due to the too much blood, and both men scoring a non-decisive win over one another there at the beginning of 76. Now, when do you think they came up with the idea to put the belt on Graham? Because Graham doesn't even come back, obviously, until 77. Do you think they knew sometime in 76, or was this a last-minute thing? Because I know Backlund was planned, as Graham has pointed out, before he even got there.
Yeah, Backlund came in. I specifically remember watching the wrestling on Channel 56 in Boston on Saturday, and on Christmas Day, 1976, Bob Backlund made his debut, at least on Boston TV. I know Boston was a little bit behind New York. But yeah, they had put Backlund in a position where, it wasn't guaranteed in 1976 that he was eventually going to get the title, but they were grooming him for the spot. They were seeing if, when the time came, he would be ready. As far as, Bruno, my understanding is as soon as, he started recovering from his broken neck before he even wrestled his first match back from that, he communicated to Vince McMahon Sr. that, okay, it's time to start, it's time to figure out an off-ramp for me to get out of this. And in my opinion, Superstar Billy Graham wasn't just the right choice. He was the only choice. He got over so big in 1976. He was the guy. Everyone bought him as world heavyweight champion. I don't even know who number two would be.
Yeah, and I came to that conclusion throughout the entire year. If not Graham, who? And honestly, I came to the conclusion when they dropped the belt to Backlund in 78. If not Backlund, then who? And I liked Backlund's early work here in the 70s, but not so much in the 80s. And he was never a great promo either. But at the same time, my only thought there was maybe turn Graham babyface after his run as a heel champion. Maybe turn him babyface, and he even works Patera a couple times here in 77 on a couple of smaller venue shows. So I'm wondering, was that to test the waters, do you think, or do they just need bodies in there for the main event of those shows?
I mean, those shows, Graham versus Patera for the title, took place in Portland and I believe once in Bangor, Maine. And according to Bob Backlund, I believe him, they used Maine as they just did weird stuff up there for no reason. It wasn't even a testing ground. Okay. They just, went off the rails there. We're getting ahead of ourselves. We're talking 1978. Right. I am 14 years old, and Graham has lost the rematches to Backlund, and he appears to be on his way out. And I say to myself, why don't they make him a good guy? He would be an excellent number two babyface. And, like I said, I saw this as a little kid, and it turns out there were reasons why Vince Sr. didn't want to do it.
So a question for you, John, here, and I had mentioned this to you in the past when we've talked online. What was your take on the whole blood loss finish? Too much blood. The referee would call for the bell. I'm not trying to discredit that type of finish. I mean, you can get that in boxing. The boxer can't see. You got to call the match. But didn't they overdo it just a little bit here up in New York?
In my opinion, no. That finish has been widely criticized, and not everyone's going to agree with me here, but I think it's an excellent finish to keep a program going when you have a top flight heel coming in, like a Greg Valentine, like a Magnificent Morocco, where you want to have a 3-match series against the champion. You have a finish where the babyface champion is bleeding. The ref wants to stop it. He's looking at the babyface. The babyface catches fire and starts pounding on the heel, and he's going to win. And no, the referee stops the match, or the commission stops the match, because the babyface is bleeding too badly. The heel wins the match, but not the title. That's just the way it is in wrestling. It doesn't change hands on count out, disqualification, blood stop. So the heel says, hey, I won. I was about to take the title. I had this guy bleeding like a pig. The babyface can say, hey, I wasn't ready to stop. The referee stopped me. And you have all the reason in the world to have a rematch.
Oh, and the way you just played that out for me, I love that. And I get that and I follow that. But I just feel like if I'm going to the Garden, let's say I'm one of the guys that are there every show, and I see the same finish 3 times in the same year, it just feels overdone to where it's almost like the Dusty finish to me, where I like it, but I don't like it when that's the finish every 3-4 months. And I think
did they really do it every 3-4 months though? I mean, I could be wrong here. I remember it being maybe once every 12 or 18 months. I guess it depends on the arena. I could be wrong here.
Well, and I was going through all of the results. So obviously they did it in New York. They did it in Boston. They did it in Philly at some time or another. So maybe I just saw it more often than it was happening at this point. So it just came redundant to me. And I've seen so much, just footage on TV, on the computer and everything. So it's just, I've seen it a lot, I guess. And I'm just lumping it all together into one thing here. But I do like the actual story it's telling. Like the first time I ever saw it, it was awesome. I thought it was great. Then I saw it again and again, and I was like,
yeah.
Got a little less whatever for me each time, but it just felt like this time it was commonplace, like a DQ or a count, at least in the bigger arenas and stuff. That's the way it came off to me. So if I'm wrong, I apologize. I didn't look and see how many times it happened specifically in the Garden or whatever for a specific year. But what was interesting here, going back to 76 real quick, Graham and Bruno, they worked 2 shows, not 3. I thought that was interesting. And then the third match, which would have been the third match you would presume, was actually Bruno and his Paisan Parisi. How's that for a gimmick? Tony Parisi, Paisan Parisi, and Bruno Sammartino going over Koloff and Graham in a 2 out of 3 fall match.
And I think that was the last time in the Bruno or Backlund era that they had a tag team match as the main event at Madison Square Garden.
Ooh, I never thought of that. And it did seem odd. I'm like, wow, Bruno in a tag match. So that kind of
Tony Parisi in the main event.
Yeah. Yeah, so Bruno had a heck of a year beyond that, though. So he worked Graham at the beginning of the year, but then, as you pointed out, he begins working with Stan Hansen, I think around April or so, and it goes through the summer. Bruno suffers the broken neck on that body slam, or the lariat if you're kayfabing, and they have that series at Shea Stadium. They come back and do the cage match. So very dynamic summer for Bruno Sammartino, and very rough summer as well. Came back pretty fast from that broken neck.
He did, and when they brought him back, at least in Boston, they brought him back in a tag team match. It was Stan Hansen and Ivan Koloff against Bruno Sammartino and Ivan Putski. I haven't seen the match, but supposedly, Bruno mostly stayed in the corner. He just, he was there to be there, but he wasn't really recovered yet.
Yeah, and over on the Grenade Show, I've been doing 1987, and it's been rough watching them bring the Dynamite Kid back really early. He's standing in the corner. He's not really doing a whole lot. People may not notice, but at WrestleMania 3, I mean, the Hearts were very, very light, very easy on him in the ring. They were very smart the way they booked him, but very stupid to even bring him back. There was a point where the Bulldogs accompanied Tito to the ring, and he was using the apron, visibly using the apron to hold himself up. And during the match, he was actually down on his knees watching the match. So it's crazy to think, Bruno, I'm not comparing that to the Dynamite injury, but again, like you said, he stayed over in that corner, so was obviously coming back a little early.
Yeah, he came back way early. Bruno told the story that Vince Sr., begged him to come back. He said, if you don't come back early, I'm going out of business. Bruno, please. And that's Bruno's side of the story, but right. I don't think Vince Sr. was going out of business, but he needed Bruno, at least at that time.
Oh, I totally agree with that. So Bruno comes back, continues working the guy that broke his neck. No problem there. Stan Hansen's told those stories several times. He didn't feel great about it. He caught a lot of heat, not necessarily in the wrestling office, but with the fans trying to just get to the Garden.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Bruno was a deity in New York and in Boston. I mean, he, the term living legend gets thrown around a little bit loosely. Bruno defines it. I mean, people, they loved him. They worshiped him.
And looking at just some of the other names real quick, we're going to try to zoom through 76 here, but I just got to touch on everything here. So he works Hansen all summer, beats him in the cage match, and then who does he go into a feud with? Or I don't call it a feud, but who does he begin to work with immediately after Hansen there in the New York City market? Bruiser Brody. So you go from Hansen to Brody. What a way to go. Brody gets a 2-shot deal with Bruno in the Garden. So they work September and October, culminating with a Texas death match, which Bruno wins there. Bruno then with a one-off with Nikolai Volkov in late October, and then 2 matches with Stan Stasiak, the former champion, to close the year. Bruno beating Stasiak in December in a Sicilian stretcher match. Any thoughts on the Brody run or the match with Nikolai or Stasiak?
Yeah, Nikolai Volkov seemed to me like a very weak contender in 1976. He just didn't measure up to the other guys. He and Bruno were friends outside the ring. I'm sure that had something to do with it. Nothing against Volkov. A one and done at Madison Square Garden isn't exactly the end of the world. Brody was great. Brody was doing kind of a caveman gimmick with the Grand Wizard as his manager. This was very early in Brody's career, obviously. And then Stan Stasiak, they brought him back and they made it sound like this guy hung the moon. He's the former World Wrestling Federation champion. They didn't mention that, he was champion for 9 days.
Right.
But, they left us to figure that out, but it sounded very mythical. Wow, if this guy did it once, he could certainly do it again. So Stasiak was taken very seriously. And then Ken Patera came into it. And Patera, in Bob Backlund's book, Ken Patera was talking about how he was originally supposed to get the WWF championship, which I find hard to believe. The fans didn't know who Patera was. They knew who Superstar Billy Graham was from his previous run.
Right, which is an excellent segue into where we're going next. We're going to talk about Superstar Billy Graham and his previous run. So he came in actually full-time, and I say full-time because maybe people don't know. Back in the day, they would actually bring a guy in long before he was coming in full time, right, John? They would put him on TV. He would come up and do the TV tapings and then go back to whatever territory he was working outside of the WWF. So he might come in for a month, 2 months, 3 months working TV tapings only. He's not really in the company yet.
No, they're just introducing him on television. You're right. He would come in for 2 sets of tapings, so 6 weeks worth. And then when he finally started, for the most part, it was in the main event in Madison Square Garden against the champion.
So Graham came in actually full-time, I say, in October of 75. So he shows up for TV, and he says in his the timeline he did with Sean Oliver, he talks about coming into the first TV taping, and he's gifted this manager, the Grand Wizard, and it kind of threw Graham off because he said outside of a little run with Humperdinck in Florida, he never really had a manager because he never really needed a manager. Graham was an excellent talker, obviously.
He was, and Jesse Ventura said the same thing. I don't need a manager. Look, here in the Northeast, every major heel had a manager. Those were the rules. The one exception was Larry Zbyszko in 1980, and that's because he didn't have a manager when he turned. But that's just the way it was in the WWF. It was part of the package. And both Graham and Ventura, I don't understand how they came up with the idea that they wouldn't have a manager. Of course you're going to have a manager. Everyone did.
I'm sure once Graham got to know Wiz and everything, if I was coming in during that period and I got to pick a manager, I'm sure a lot of people would say Albano. I just loved the way I loved his look as a kid. So I didn't even care what he said. It was like, this guy just looks cool.
My friends and I, we would play a game when we were kids. Like, we looked in the magazine and we'd say, okay, what if Dick Slater came to the WWF? Who would be his manager? It was part of the fun.
Right.
And the way it broke down, Albano got the tag teams and the geeks. Fred Blassie got the foreign guys and some of the geeks. And if you were good, you were managed by the Grand Wizard.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So while Graham got the Wiz, he gets going there at the end of 75. And while they're in that run into 76, he worked those aforementioned matches with Bruno at the Garden in January, February 76. And then, lack of a better term here, I'll let you, fix this for me. But after those 2 matches with Bruno, everything Graham did, it seemed like after that was a lot of tag teaming with Ivan Koloff specifically. And what I just called it novelty matches because it was against all the big guys like Gorilla Monsoon, Bobo Brazil, Haystacks Calhoun. There really wasn't no end game to it. It was just throw them in there with the big guys and the gimmicks like Haystacks and things.
back then, and this era was coming to an end, everyone had sort of a regular tag team partner. And like I said, this was coming to an end, but Superstar Billy Graham's regular tag team partner was Ivan Koloff. Stan Hansen's regular tag team partner was Bruiser Brody. Nikolai Volkov's regular tag team partner was Tor Kamada. And like I said, that was coming to an end, but it was pretty common back then.
So Graham winds up leaving the company in May of 76, and he'll return here by March of 77 and do about 8 to 9 weeks of TV squashes to build himself back up for his title shot with Bruno in Baltimore coming up here in April. And that's where we are with Bruno and Billy Graham. So now we get to the fun part here, hopefully for you, John. And that's the tag team division. And I'll use air quotes again when I say division. People who were fans in the 80s, they got to watch these big Survivor Series matches with 10 teams, 20 guys. Look at all these tag teams all around. And now people complain because there's not a lot of tag teams in some of the promotions out there. But back then, man, it was like your top heel team and your top face team in New York. Maybe there was a third team floating around somewhere on and off, like a Zbyszko and Gurria or something like that. But here we are in the tag team division, as I marked it here. And the current champions coming into 77 were Billy White Wolf and your boy, Chief Jay Strongbow.
My boy, Chief Jay Strongbow. I mean, I've told this story so many times. I was like a minor wrestling fan. You know, if it was on, I watched it. Like coming into 1976, people were like, oh, who's your favorite wrestler? And I'm like, well, Billy White Wolf. You mean Chief Jay Strongbow, right? No, I mean Billy White Wolf. I've never seen Chief Jay Strongbow. And when Strongbow came in, he made me a hardcore wrestling fan. And I know now, I knew 40 years ago how terrible Chief Jay Strongbow was, but he had charisma. I don't know how else to put it, but I mean, people in the Northeast were in love with him. He died like 10 years ago, and I heard about it on the internet, but I'm driving home listening to the radio, and they're talking about Chief Jay Strongbow passing away. I mean, think about that. That's crazy.
Yeah, it really is in today's day and age, especially where everybody tries to forget. You know, like when I was a kid growing up throughout the 80s and whatnot, I knew all of the famous actors and comedians and things of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And everything was still on TV from 30 and 40 years prior. Now it's like if it didn't happen in the last 10 years, it's irrelevant. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy that, you know, that they do that. But that's how big he was, at least in certain markets.
He was really big in the Northeast. He was big in New York, but there was something about Strongbow around Boston. I mean, people just ate him up. I mean, we'll talk about this as the show goes on. Strongbow didn't get title shots against Superstar Billy Graham at Madison Square Garden. He got, I think, 2 or 3 in Boston, one of which was the blow-off cage match.
Right, and we're coming into 77, and Strongbow and White Wolf are now champions, but they've only been champions as far as TV is concerned for about a week or so heading into 77. Now, the previous champions were the tag team of the Executioners, managed by Lou Albano. The Executioners being Killer Kowalski and Big John Studd, who formed that tag team in March of 76. They won the titles by May of 76 over Tony Parisi and Louis Cerdan. So, a fun fact here, I noticed this when I was doing some research. Did you know that Strongbow came back and they did the whole deal? Strongbow and White Wolf became a tag team at the same exact taping that the Executioners won the titles. It was almost like kismet, like it was fate somehow. It's almost like somebody booked this.
I knew it happened right around the same time. I remember it was Billy White Wolf and Jose Gonzalez were wrestling Rocky Tamayo and Crusher Blackwell, and the heels were beating up on White Wolf. They threw Gonzalez out of the ring, and Strongbow just comes out of the dressing room unannounced, you know, and the fans just went wild, and it was, you know, the tag team was born.
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, is there footage of that? I don't think there's footage of that, of Strongbow's return to the company.
Not that I'm aware of, no. And back then, I mean, VCRs I didn't know anyone who had a VCR
right.
in like 1981.
So Strongbow had been gone since August of 1975. He returns in May of 76. Strongbow kind of jumped around here and there, the famous shark cage match up in Detroit.
Oh, dear.
So Strongbow did some things in between his time there, but he's back, returns in 76 to save his fellow quote-unquote Indian White Wolf from a beatdown, as you just talked about there. Really cool insight as well, John. I didn't know who was in the match. I didn't mark that down here in my, to know that Blackwell was in there. That's pretty cool. So I didn't even know what was actually like the match that it happened in. So I appreciate you filling us in, give us a little insight. And that's why you're on this show.
I mean, that's, you know what? If that match had never taken place, I could have cured cancer by now. I could have done something useful with my life. But no, I got hooked on pro wrestling. Wow.
Unbelievable. Yeah, so no wonder it sticks in your head. It's just like it happened not too long ago. I won't say yesterday, but not that long ago. It's my original impressions of wrestling are embedded in me forever. So, but in all actuality, the rumors have it that Strongbow really returned because he got word that Billy White Wolf was getting over. And there's really only room for one Native American, so to speak. I mean, I know they become a tag team, but one top Native American here. And did you ever hear those rumors? That's the reason Strongbow came back, to kind of make sure that White Wolf didn't steal his long-term spot there in the company.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, White Wolf was never Strongbow. Billy White Wolf was my first favorite wrestler, but he was never Chief Jay Strongbow. White Wolf himself did an interview talking about how Chief Jay Strongbow was jealous of him, and he didn't want, Strongbow didn't want White Wolf stealing his thunder. And I'm sure there was something to that. Like, okay, Strongbow's probably saying, okay, this is my territory, my gimmick. There's only room for one guy with the Indian gimmick. And I'm sure there was something to that. But White Wolf was never a threat to Strongbow. I mean, White Wolf made it clear in this interview he did not like Chief Jay Strongbow.
Okay. But we've heard that so many times with tag teams. That's unbelievable. But it's a common thing that seems to happen quite often.
It happens, but rarely does a guy just come right out and talk about it the way White Wolf did. I was a little bit surprised. Like, you hear about guys in tag teams either maybe not getting along, but he's just not my favorite person in the world. Right. I've been traveling with this guy for 3 years. We've heard each other's jokes too many times. I heard that about Michaels and Jannetty. I heard that about Brian Blair and Jim Brunzell. They didn't dislike each other. It's just they weren't best friends. It seemed to go a step beyond that with Strongbow and White Wolf. Like, Strongbow didn't talk to anybody, so who knows how he felt about it. But White Wolf made it clear he didn't like Strongbow.
All right, so these two get paired together, and they don't like each other. So,
yes.
Or at least White Wolf. So initially, what do you do? You have two Native Americans in the same territory. So what do you have to do, John? You have to team them up, right?
Of course.
And so here we go. May of 76, Strongbow returns, and the new team is born. Unfortunately, they wait until October. We fast forward all the way to October 23rd TV. We see Chief Jay Strongbow and Billy White Wolf defeat the tag team champions of the Executioners in 2 straight falls. Fall number 1 saw the challengers score a pinfall win. Fall number 2, however, John, the champions are disqualified after a third Executioner is caught interrupting the matchup.
Albano is kicking one of the Executioners under the ring. Wait a minute. There's another Executioner. What in the world is going on here? Antonino. There are 3. At least we know there are 3. How many Executioners are there? We saw 3 Executioners. Completely 3. I counted 10 times now. 1, 2, and 3. Let's get the official word.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time of the second fall, 2 minutes, 28 seconds. Here are your winners, Chief Jay Strongbow.
White Wolf wanted to know where those tag team championship belts are. And after it appears that in that final fall, that there was a disqualification. We've just been informed by referee Dick Worley, a third Executioner coming in, and that, of course, certainly grounds for disqualification.
Ladies and gentlemen, the only way a championship may change hands is either by pinning or submitting. Therefore, there's no title change. However, the winners remain Chief Jay Strongbow and Billy White Wolf.
Well, that's going to make a lot of people angry. Let's take a look. We have it. Let's take a look at action. Now look, if you would. There's one Executioner under the ring. Yes, is the man entering the ring now was not the one that's under the ring. There's one under there right now. They hammer away on this one. And look, Albano goes down from behind, underneath the apron. There are 2 Executioners out there with Captain Lou. and they're dragging a third executioner out. Ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be tremendous controversy surrounding this match. But there we see it with our own eyes. 3 executioners, and there's no telling how many executioners Lou Albano really has in his stable.
I remember this and just being like, my eyes were bulging out of my head. There are now 3 executioners on the TV, and the executioners were stripped of the tag team titles for this offense in a way that makes no sense. I mean, it's a disqualification. Why are you stripping them of the titles? But then after they commit a crime so heinous that they can no longer be tag team champions, they're allowed into the tournament to be the new champions.
Right. Yeah. And they continue to cheat in the tournament as well. Not a third executioner, but they're still bad guys.
Yes, they certainly are.
So,
you know what? I'll say this about that feud. It went on way too long. I thought by the time the Strongbows won the tag team titles, finally, they were beyond stale. And I get that in wrestling, there's the old cliche that the money is in the chase, but this chase just went on way too long. I think they should have waited to bring Strongbow in. Yeah,
and then actually I had that question coming up for you, so we'll touch a little bit more on that when we'll move along here a little bit. But so as per the usual, they scored 2 wins, but that second one by disqualification, and therefore the ring announcer Gary Capetta has to announce the title does not change hands to a loud sound of boos from the crowd. We fast forward, though, a week later, we get promos from both sides. First, it's Billy White Wolf, and it's really Jay Strongbow, explaining his belief that there were 3 executioners out there. Out comes Dick Worley, the referee for the match next. He also tells Vince McMahon he saw 3 executioners out there. He had no option but to call for the disqualification.
The most controversial tag team championship match ever held. 2 out of 3 fall event, but many individuals saw what happened in that third fall. At least they think they saw. Not 1, not 2, but 3 executioners. And for this reason, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation is studying the films of last week and considering recommendations as to the action that should or should not be taken by the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in reference to the executioners either holding or stripping them from the tag team championship. Well, right now, let's bring on 2 individuals who were involved in that tag team championship match last week. Let's bring on Jay Strongbow and Indian Billy White Wolf. But last week, what's your version of what happened?
Well, Billy and myself have been thinking about this for a long time, because every time it seemed like we wrestled the executioners, in different states have different rules, and some states have rules that between falls you can go back to the dressing room. And I know a couple of times Billy used the deathlock on one of them, and he hobbled to the dressing room. And the next fall started, it seemed like the man was stronger. So I think this has been happening for a long time. I think that there might be 3 or 4 or 5 executioners, and I feel that Billy and myself are the actual champions, because I figure that we beat them right inside this ring here. I had the sleeper on one of them inside the ring, and when the referee was telling me to turn him loose, I looked up and there was another man standing right inside the apron here. So I feel that Billy and myself are the claimants for the WWWF World Tag Team title.
What action do you think should be taken by the Worldwide Wrestling Federation officially?
Billy and myself will go along with the Federation. Whatever they want to do, we'll go along with it. But we're downright disgusted and disappointed, because we feel that we're actually the champions, and we've been robbed of the tag team title, and I think we beat them in other rings around the country. And what actually happened, I think they switched on us, and this is not the first time. This is the only time that Albano got caught doing it. I tell you, we're ready for him, and we still claim the titles. We believe that we're world champions. Billy and myself worked hard. We trained hard to become world tag team champions, and get a fellow like Albano to go to any extreme to do what he's been doing. I think they ought to abolish the mask, get a man without a mask if he can't get in the ring without hiding his damn, excuse me.
Just don't get mad.
If he can't come in the ring without hiding his face, he don't belong inside this ring. That's the way I feel. And Albano is using that to ship 4 or 5 executioners inside that ring. Chief Jay Strongbow and Indian Billy White Wolf, and you heard their version, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, we're going to bring on referee Dick Worley here to my left, and of course, this was the individual who disqualified the Executioners, and unquestionably it was a controversial match. What is your version of what happened, Dick?
Well, during the match, the match was hot and heavy, and you're trying to watch what's going on in the ring, unless to watch Albano and, pulling his antics outside of the ring. Well, I had looked over, the Indian had the sleeper on one of the Executioners, and I had seen one of the Executioners fall outside of the ring. I saw Albano bending down. I tried to keep an eye on the sleeper hold. The next thing I know, I could see Albano dragging somebody off, and there was another Executioner standing on the apron. So I said to Strongbow, I said, release the hold, they're disqualified, and I disqualified them right there and then. But actually, Chief Jay Strongbow had the sleeper on him. I think the match would have been over right there and then.
But then comes Captain Lou Albano, and we get this.
You're a well-respected official. What action do you think should be taken?
I think...
I hate to interrupt you, Dick, but I think...
Liar, you're a liar, liar! Let me tell you this, McMahon. At this time, I will make a statement. My champions will remain world champions. There is no way that you can take the belts from these men unless they are pinned in 2 decisive falls. And I will say at this time that it was a mere optical illusion. There were not 3 men. There were 2 men. The camera playing tricks on my Executioners. I will make this statement. You cannot take a championship. You cannot take the belts from my champions. I, Captain Lou Albano, I, Captain Lou Albano, am the owner of the World Championship. It cannot be taken from me.
Mr. Albano, there was no optical illusion last week, and you can hear from the fans voicing their...
That's a subject that they themselves are trying to perpetrate upon the people. We move so fast and there are times they might think there's 3 or 4 Executioners, but the camera can't even keep up with the way we move in that ring. We are champions. We do not, and we have not resorted to any illegal tactics. We do not ring under our own cognizance. We should not ring with our own ability and our own power. To see this through, we'll take it to the courts and we'll have the belt put back around us.
Are you aware of the fact, Mr. Albano, that Jay Strongbow and Billy White Wolf and many other fans and officials are asking the Worldwide Wrestling Federation to strip you of the championship?
No!
You are denying the fact that there are 3 executions.
Optical illusion! It's a lie! Strongbow's a liar! The referee's a liar!
You've heard it from the Executioners, their version, and also from Lou Albano, they're upset. Strongbow, White Wolf, they're upset. Everybody's upset, and next week we're going to have unquestionably an official ruling.
We're the champions!
We'll be back with the very first match in just a moment.
All right, so there we have it. Captain Lou, an optical illusion, John, or an optical delusion. Also, Captain Lou has no idea what he's saying sometimes, and that's what made him Lou Albano. I loved him for that. But so an optical illusion. I can't believe I love this line. The Executioners, and you never hear Kowalski blamed for this, or Stud for that matter. They were moving so fast, John, that's why we thought we saw 3 of them.
Albano was such a national treasure back then, man. Unbelievable.
So it's like a 3-week story arc here on TV. We get the match, we get the promos, and then finally, November 6th, television, an announcement from the WWF president, Willie Gilzeberg, that the tag team champion Executioners have been stripped of their belts due to that 3rd Executioner. For those who don't know, that was Nikolai Volkov hiding under the ring there. Appeared during the matchup, tried to get involved there. So Strongbow and White Wolf got the win. The Executioners got to keep the titles for a couple weeks, TV anyway. And now they're stripped of the titles for cheating.
And then they brought out this tournament that was just painful. I mean, it went on for weeks and weeks, and you'd have jobber tag teams in the middle of it, like Bill Berger and Silvano Souza, and like towards the end. And Vince would be like, "Oh, they're a late entry into this tournament." I'm like, "Yeah, that's how tournaments work. We'll just put this team into the Sweet 16 out of nowhere." It made no sense.
They threw a lot of extra tournament matches in here, but the gist of the tournament, and I wrote these results down, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but these are the results I got. Strongbow and White Wolf in the not the first round, the quarterfinals by this point, because the first round, as you pointed out, was just a bunch of random matches that really had no reason to rhyme. But we see Strongbow and White Wolf over the team of Bruiser Brody and Hansen on a DQ. Boy, that would have been interesting back then, huh?
Yeah, Brody and Hansen teamed pretty regularly in the WWF, especially in B towns or the smaller arenas, the high school gyms, the ice arenas, Jack Witchie's in North Attleboro, etc.
Yeah, I mean, they broke in together. They were no strangers to one another or teaming up, but it's just really cool to see them teaming here up in New York. It just seems like, they seem out of place up in New York. Like, there's some people going to get their butts whooped.
Yeah, and some people did. I mean, they were new to the business, and like you said, they knew each other. I mean, it seemed like, even though they had different managers, I mean, they teamed on TV a few times, and, they had chemistry together.
So we know Chief Jay and Billy White Wolf advanced to the semis, as do your favorite, no, not your favorite team, but the cheating team of the Executioners, as you pointed out, were allowed back into the tournament, which makes no sense. I'm stripping you of the belts, but you guys can go back and try to win them back if you want to. Executioners, best as I can tell here, a quarterfinal match over the future Invader Jose Gonzalez and Special Delivery Jones. Also, this is interesting, Jones doing double duty here because they just really didn't care in this quarterfinals. It's Tor Kamada and Nikolai Volkov over the top caliber team, as you also mentioned. This time it was Frankie Williams and SD Jones. And to round things out, quarterfinal matches, Gorilla Monsoon teaming with Jose Gonzalez, who had already been eliminated. This sounds like WCW in 2000. It's Gorilla Monsoon and Gonzalez over the pair of Johnny Rodz and Gashouse Doug Gilbert.
Gashouse Gilbert, I was told an interesting story by Kevin Sullivan. He said that he got that nickname because he was the first wrestler everyone was 100% convinced was on steroids, which I think is weird because Superstar Billy
I was going to say
that's earlier.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Kevin said.
And I've seen some of Gilbert here in the WWF, and I'm not saying he wasn't on the steroids. I'm sure he was. But at the same time, I was looking at some pictures of him. I've seen him in some of the matches on video as well, but I was looking at some pictures of him at the Garden and things. I'm like, that guy doesn't look like, and you can look like you're not on him and still be on him, but it wasn't like obvious, you know what I mean? Whereas Superstar Graham, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, come on.
Yeah. No, I mean, Gilbert looked like he was on them, but I mean, the idea that he somehow stood out, I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. So we move on to the semifinals. It was Strongbow and White Wolf over the Executioners on a DQ, and it was Kamada and Volkov over Gorilla Monsoon and Gonzalez on a countout. Notice the pattern here, non-finishes.
Yes. I mean, the WWF was just full of those. If you had any kind of star level, you were not doing a clean job.
So we go forward just one more week here. Chief Jay Strongbow and Billy White Wolf in the finals of the tournament finally scored that win that they needed, defeating the team of Volkov and Kamada, not the Executioners, in the final, by disqualification to win the vacant WWF title. So even in the finals, they couldn't give us a finish.
The finish they had, and mind you, I was 12 years old, okay? The finish that they did was Tor Kamada blinded Billy White Wolf with the salt, and the referee saw it and called for the DQ. Strongbow goes and grabs the belts, and he shows them to White Wolf. And I'm waiting for White Wolf to be so overwhelmed by the fact that he won the title that it would cure his blindness, because I was young and I was living in a cartoon world, and it didn't. Billy White Wolf was still blind, but Strongbow, blinded by the salt temporarily. And he and Strongbow had finally won the belts after so many months of, trying and just missing.
So this particular match, now you said you got that Boston feed, so you got everything a little later. So my question here might be irrelevant to you. I wrote here, was this match actually aired in the New York market, WOR, on Christmas Day, or I should say Christmas night. So I wrote, was this a Christmas present for you, John, or should I say a late present for you here, watching
It
your
was a
hero win the
late
belts?
present for me, even though by this point, honestly, I was tired of Strongbow and White Wolf. The way it worked, and I'm from New York. I have relatives in New York. And anytime we went to visit the relatives in New York, I watched the midnight show on Channel 9. And 2 weeks later, I would see that same show again in Boston on Channel 56. So we were exactly 2 weeks behind.
Okay, 2 weeks behind. That's good to know. I mean, I never knew that. I wonder when everything caught up. Do you think it caught up when Vince?
January 1984.
Okay. Well, wow. Just in time for Hulkamania.
No coincidence there, I believe.
Yeah, I'm guessing. So my other question at this point in the show, though, the feud and the title switch, you touched on it already, so you kind of already answered this question, but do you think it was too drawn out? I mean, we still have these two going at it, and the baby faces, they've been chasing since basically May, June. 6 months later, they finally get the belts here at the end of the year. And you said you were kind of over it by this point. Did it bring back any of your juice for this, or were you still like, eh?
No, by the time Strongbow and White Wolf won the titles, I no longer cared about that team. And, I mean, time goes by much more slowly when you are younger. But, I mean, that feud was beyond drawn out. I look at the results, and I still see White Wolf and Strongbow going at it with the Executioners in 1977. And I'm like, This is ridiculous.
Yeah, almost up until they're gone. The Executioners leave the company.
Yeah, and it was, I've talked about this on Stick to Wrestling. I mean, I had just started watching wrestling when the Executioners showed up. If you had watched 2 years earlier, I mean, there's no way you couldn't have known that was Killer. One of them was Killer Kowalski, and the other one was Chuck O'Connor. You could not have not known.
But was Stud, was he there like prominently enough on TV to have remembered his physical build? Kowalski, I agree with. If you were watching, in a time period, there's just nobody else with that body type. It's just, and then he cuts promos under the hood here. We heard, back in October when he was explaining, when him and Lou Albano were explaining the third Executioner, or the Optical Illusion, if you will, depending on who you want to believe. So we hear his voice. It's a very distinguished voice. That's Killer Kowalski's voice.
They did interviews with the Executioners almost every week, and if you had ever heard Kowalski before, you absolutely had to know it was him. But wait, Kowalski had been wrestling under a mask in 1974, so if that's not enough of a tip to you,
right.
His voice, his body, he's been wearing a mask.
That's right. I forgot about that. That's right. So we're about to jump into 77, but before we do, I just want to touch on some of the names we're going to be running into here in 77 and start off with the mainstays, guys that were already here. We talked Bruno, White Wolf, and Strongbow, the Executioners. We haven't mentioned them yet, but Polish Power Ivan Putski, Gorilla Monsoon, and by the summer, Nikolai and Kamada arrived in 76, so they've been here in the company for at least 6 months at this point themselves.
Yeah, and Kamada, he got one shot against Bruno, I think in New Haven in 76. I mean, I bought Kamada as a star, believe it or not. And looking back, I'm surprised that, they didn't get more out of him. Kamada could be pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. I've seen Kamada work. I've even seen some of his, later stuff after this in the Garden, coming off the top rope. I mean, the guy was very mobile for his size and for his age.
Yeah, let's face it. He was a big fat guy with a big stomach, but he could be a lot of fun, and he could bleed like crazy when the occasion called for it. And we'll be speaking more about that.
And there's a list, and as people may notice if they go and they check out the history of wrestling and they start looking through the territories, a common time for someone to leave a territory and show up in a new territory is right around the new year. And that's no different here this year in the New York market, because a lot of guys are starting to leave the company, and they include Victor Rivera, who actually didn't return until the fall of 76, but he's already gone by the end of the year, which is really odd for the WWF to have a guy come in, work 3 months, and then just leave the company again, especially since Rivera had done all that he had done prior to jumping over to the IWA.
Yeah, Rivera, his push didn't reflect the push that he had gotten earlier. I mean, he was one of their top guys, in the late 60s and early 70s. Right. And when he came back in 1976, he was clearly a step behind, not just Bruno, Putski, etc., but he was a step behind guys like Strongbow and White Wolf. He was right around at Dominic DeNucci's level.
Wow, yeah, and I haven't seen a lot of Rivera from 76, so I wasn't really sure where his pecking order was, but wasn't it so interesting back then? You could literally take the 20 names and you could put them in the exact pecking order back then. You kind of knew where everybody was. There wasn't just preliminary guys. There was like an order. You knew who could beat who. It was always a fun time to be able to sit there and do that. You knew where everybody was on the card.
Yeah, you didn't just have tiers. It was like, stars, jobber to the stars, jobbers. It was like, I knew that S.D. Jones got a little bit more of a push than Jose Gonzalez, who got a little bit more of a push than Johnny Rivera.
Yeah, and that's an excellent list there, because that's correct. It would go Jones, Gonzalez, Rivera. And all of those guys were phenomenal talents, really.
They really were. Johnny Rivera was small. I shouldn't say small. He was short, but he was very well built. He was wide. He could throw a great drop kick. Excuse me. But yeah, I mean, his stature held him back.
Yeah, he was on the shorter side. But I always get excited. Well, I don't want to say excited, but when I'm watching the old stuff from the 70s and I see Johnny Rivera in there, I know the match is probably going to be pretty decent for TV.
Yeah, it was always, when you got Johnny Rivera against a top heel, you knew what the result was going to be, but at least this time, the babyface was going to get in some offense, unlike a Steve King, unlike a Charlie Brown, who just, sat there and got pummeled every week.
Right. So Rivera's gone by the end of the year. Stan Hansen's pretty much finishing up. Kevin Sullivan's out the door as well, I should point out. Bobo Brazil actually worked quite a bit for the company in 76, and I didn't realize that till I was going back and doing this research here. Bobo was there quite a bit here in 76, but gone by the end of the year.
Two things I want to talk about. Kevin Sullivan's career was ended in the beginning of 1977 when he suffered a severe neck injury at the hands of Ken Patera. I don't know who this guy was who was in Georgia and Florida and everywhere else pretending to be Kevin Sullivan, but I assure you Vince McMahon told me on TV that his career was over. Same thing with Jose Gonzalez. Ken Patera gave him a neck injury that put him out of wrestling forever.
Wow, I thought it was because Carlos Colon came in and worked the Garden Show and then Gonzalez disappeared back to Puerto Rico with him, but it's good to know.
No, and same thing with Billy White Wolf. That guy who was Sheik Adnan obviously is not Billy White Wolf. His career was ended at the hands of Ken Patera.
Doppelgangers.
Bobo Brazil was billed as the United States champion.
Yeah.
And I to this day, I don't know what to make of that. Every time they announced him, the United States heavyweight champion, Bobo Brazil, there was no championship belt. There were no feuds or programs based around this championship. I don't remember there being any notable title defenses in Madison Square Garden or the Boston Garden, but they billed him as that every time he came out.
Well, we'll talk about another title here in just a little bit that I don't remember being defended here either. Also leaving the company, but at least we get a little taste of it here in 77. Bruiser Brody is going to be gone by the first week of February, but he's still here for another month. We're going to touch on Brody in a little bit.
I always wondered why they didn't do a real program with Bruiser Brody and Andre the Giant. I mean, even, as a kid, 12, 13 years old, I'm like, okay, this is the most natural matchup out there, and they never did it. And this is before, Brody turned into Brody, where he didn't do jobs, he didn't sell, etc.
Right. Yeah, so at least we get a little bit of Brody talk here when we begin the 77 here in just a moment. But I also want to look at all the returning names so that everybody knows who has just returned to the company here as we begin 77. So they're not wondering, why is he positioned here on the card? Why is it like this? And there's a lot of names. I just mentioned a ton of names that left the company in December of 76, but there were a lot of names that came back. They returned to the company in December 76. Also, some other guys making their debuts. Tony Gurria returns. Sigh. Also, but Larry Zbyszko, we hadn't seen him since the early part of 75. Also, John, I don't know how much of a fan you are of Tony Gurria. You might find out as we continue this show. I just felt like I didn't understand his push.
Tony was a really good-looking guy with a good physique, and I thought they could have done more with him, to be honest. I thought the role they gave him when he came back at the very beginning of 1977, they could have done more with him, and Superstar Billy Graham's first title defense in Boston was against Tony Gurria.
Yeah, Graham worked Gurria quite a bit here as champion. The Vince the Elder didn't seem to, have an issue with Gurria, at least in the smaller markets and things. But what'd you say, Boston also?
Yeah, they had a card scheduled, before April 30th, where Bruno Sammartino was supposed to defend against George the Animal Steele, and further down the card was superstar Billy Graham against Tony Gurria. And when Graham won the belt, it was like, okay, well, that's a title match now.
So Gurria and Zbyszko return, both December of 76 TV tapings, I should point out. We'll see them teaming a lot here in 1977, but also coming to the company in December of 76 TV was Baron von Raschke. How do you think Baron Mikkel Cicluna felt about that? He was already doing jobs every week, but now there's a second Baron in town. Was he fearing for his career here?
I mean, Cicluna was just playing out the string, and he would continue to do so into 1983. But I kind of noticed that there were two Barons, and I'm like, wow, are these guys going to be a tag team? No.
Night and day, the pushes that Raschke and Cicluna were given here.
I mean, and they kept, I mean, not to get off of 76, 77, but I mean, by the time Cicluna retired in 83, I mean, my God, he was physically falling apart. He was wearing a singlet to try to hide the fact that his body was that of an old man. I mean, he played it out as long as he possibly could.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a company man, they must have loved him up there because, like you pointed out, they kept him until the wheels fell off.
Yeah, he must have been, he had been there since he was a tag team champion, like 72, and just homesteaded. I know he lived in New Jersey, and that's just what he did for a living, going on the road and being a wrestler as long as he possibly could, like you said, until the wheels fell off.
Also returning in the tail end of 76, now into 77, Stan Stasiak. We talked about his couple matches with Bruno. It's interesting to know how serious he was taken as a challenger, because all I saw from Stan in the late 70s, well, not only was he fairly immobile in the ring, but Vince McMahon on commentary he would never bury talent, but he would point out that heart punch really isn't getting the job done anymore, and guys were blocking it and reversing it and doing all these things with it. Stasiak wasn't the same Stasiak, but it's interesting to know when he first came back that they made him a serious threat.
They did, and I took him very seriously as a threat. I mean, obviously he was a draw, and he was just one of those guys, like, by the end of 77, he should have been on his way, but, by the middle of 78, he's on TV doing jobs in tag team matches, and he was still being billed as a former WWF champion. I mean, my honest opinion was they should not have had him out there, but I guess they liked him. You know what? A lot of people liked Stan Stasiak. I remember him playing out the string in Portland, and then talking on TV, talking about, Stan's getting towards the end of his career. If you need a salesman or a spokesman for your company, give us a call. Stan will help you out.
Yeah, I mean, it pays to be a good guy sometimes.
Lesson to be learned, exactly.
So Stasiak's back. Also, we get a couple of newcomers to the company. They start at the end of 76 doing TV tapings. That is a fellow by the name of Bob Backlund. Maybe you guys have heard of him. Also, another fellow by the name of Ken Patera.
Yeah, Patera was really impressive. I read about him in the magazines. I was very surprised to see him show up in the WWF as a heel managed by Captain Lou Albano. Bob Backlund I had read about. He was a big deal in Florida. He had been the Missouri State heavyweight champion. Surprisingly enough, Backlund, Gurria, and Zbyszko all showed up right around the same time. I want to say within a month of each other. And it felt like the three of them were getting kind of an identical push, the little bit less than Ivan Putski type push. And no, I didn't realize at the time they were gearing up for something with Bob Backlund.
Talk about grooming a guy. I mean, Backlund comes in at the end of 76 and he just does TV for nearly a full year. He doesn't even go full time with the company until December of 77.
And I didn't realize it at the time. I was very surprised when I learned that he would just come up, do tapings, and then fly back to Florida and do whatever he was doing there.
Yeah, so we've discussed all of the rest. I saved the best for last, though. So long before the Portuguese Mano wore Aldo Montoya, there was the Portuguese champion, Carlos Rocha or Roca or Rocha, or it depends on how you want. Yeah, Rocha. Okay. Well, I've heard it pronounced various ways, including the Portuguese way, and it's going to be hard for me to keep doing that. So we'll go with Rocha here, he was 50 years old at the time he was brought in here in January of 77. John, I know you said you had the reasoning for them bringing Rocha in here at the age of 50.
They did. Rocha looked very old, and he looked very out of place, and no one has actually told me this, but here's what I have deducted, okay? I used to live in North Attleboro, Massachusetts in 1977. I lived there, and they had weekly wrestling at Jack Witchy's Sports Arena, which I learned was about a mile down the road from where I lived, and I attended a couple of shows there, and that was a very heavily Portuguese area, like Providence, New Bedford, North Attleboro, the Attleboros, etc. What's the name of it? Just around there. And I looked back and counted. Carlos Rocha was in the WWF for about 6 months.
Right.
He main evented 11 shows at Jack Witchy Sports Arena inside that 6-month period. And I'm not kidding. It felt like more. I just went to the history of WWE and looked that up, and it felt like he was in the main event every week. And again, I really believe it was for the Portuguese fans in that area. And he actually got a main event against superstar Billy Graham at the Providence Civic Center during that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a little research myself on that. So that was the same conclusion I came to, but I wanted to wait and hear your take on it because you came to me, you're like, hey, I think I got this figured out. And I was like, okay. And then I did a little research myself and I said, I think we're probably going to come to the same conclusion. But I too, I looked everything up and it does appear that everywhere he I won't just say main evented, but he headlined or he got one of the top tier matches was usually a city with a large Portuguese population, either with immigrants or Portuguese Americans. Places like Providence, Rhode Island, as you pointed out, lots of places in Massachusetts. And then I did a little more search on the Portuguese populations. And Massachusetts has 6 of the 10 highest Portuguese populated cities by percentage in the entire United States. Rhode Island has 2. So 8 of the top 10 cities in the entire United States by percentage of the Portuguese population are all right there in Rhode Island and Massachusetts.
Yeah, and it showed, it was a fishing industry, and for whatever reason they brought in a lot of Portuguese immigrants around Fall River, New Bedford, Providence, etc. And I'm not sure, the statistics you gave out if that was like a 2022 statistic, but I can tell you it was even more underlined 50 years ago.
Okay.
They had a weekly Portuguese newspaper that I delivered.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's putting it in perspective. I appreciate your insight there.
Thank you.
So I went online. I was trying to look. There's like no video footage for some reason of Rocha, who had worked for many years, around the horn. Usually we can find like one match of pretty much anybody if you look hard enough. And I just couldn't find a match of him, but I found a lot of younger pictures of him. I said, this guy looked pretty put together, well in shape, pretty decent looking guy. I get it. And then I saw one picture of him probably from around this time period. I said, oh my God, he looks pretty damn rough for 50. He looked like a hard 60, man. 60. I mean, I know they say back in the day, everybody aged, worse than they do now, but man, for 50 years old, I mean, he was, I remember my grandpa when he turned, in his 50s and he didn't look anything this bad, but Rocha, he didn't even look like a wrestler, I guess, he just kind of looked like somebody's grandpa.
No, he did. And it stood out. It really stood out. It's like, why is this older guy who's, really not in shape, what is he doing in the wrestling business? And I figured out the Portuguese connection, years later, but I mean, he stood out as someone, and I couldn't, every week I would get the newspaper with the clipping from Jack Witchy Sports Arena telling us what the matches were going to be. And I'd see Rocha in the main event. I'm like, what is this? And it's funny because, when he was gone, he was gone. I figured, you look back, you're like, okay, well, just keep him around and put him on the undercard if the Portuguese population likes him so much. But no, he just disappeared quickly after that.
Yeah, so he gets a 6-month run of mediocrity here in 77, but he does get that title match with Graham, even though Graham says he doesn't even remember who Rocha was. Do you think Aldo Montoya was like the revisit of this? Like Vince was just sitting around one day and he was like, God damn, pal, we need us a new Portuguese superstar. We need another Carlos Rocha.
I bet he was. I mean, that's from what I understand. That's just how Vince operates. Just something would jump into his head, like he'd remember Carlos Rocha. Get the kid from Connecticut. Get him in there, damn it.
We need a Portuguese superstar, and I need a turkey. Light on the mustard. So, of course, down the road, we'll be talking other new guys returning to the company, Fuji and Tanaka. Peter Maivia shows up, George Steele, Butcher Vachon, Spiros Arion, Larry Sharp and Jack Evans, random appearances by guys like Dusty Rhodes, Andre, Haystacks. Dewey Robertson jumps in here at one point. My guilty pleasure also. We get to talk a little bit about the Golden Terror.
The Golden Terror, he really stood out as being goofy. He was Pete Doherty with basically a banana suit. He had this gold mask, gold trunks, gold top, managed by Captain Lou Albano, at least to start with. And, I was just like, is this guy really going to wrestle for the championship? What are we doing here? He came in right around the same time as Butcher Vachon. And just, middle of the card heels that were managed by Lou Albano. But at first, you're like, is this guy going to get pushed? Is he going to be in main events? And, the answer turned out to be no.
All right. And all of that kind of just sets the stage. And for those who are unfamiliar with my grenade show, that's what I do at the beginning of any of my projects. I like to let everybody know what's going on, who's coming in, who's going out, what's the stories heading into the new year, rather than just, like I said, hitting the ground running. People are like, wait, I don't understand what's happening here. I feel that's really an important thing to do. Just give, and your knowledge, your memories, it really, enhance this whole thing.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I love talking about this stuff.
So let's talk, now that we're in 1977, let's talk about the way the TV was set up back then. Of course, you had the A show, if you will, Championship Wrestling taped back then out of the Philadelphia Arena. Graham's talked about it before. He said that he liked that one better because there was one big locker room where everybody was in the same locker room. They could all congregate and talk and things of that nature. And Gary Capetta at this point was I believe, was the ring announcer here at Championship Wrestling. I think Gary Capetta was there full time by this point. Yes, no?
I believe Gary Capetta was doing the All-Star Wrestling and Joe McHugh was doing the Championship Wrestling. Again, I'm pretty sure that's what this setup was in 77.
Oh, okay. I thought they flip-flopped and Capetta went to All-Star when they changed to Allentown, but I'm not positive. That's why I was asking you.
Okay, no, I could be wrong. I remember Gary Capetta just being this really young guy. He looked like he could have been in high school.
Yes,
and then you got Joe McHugh, who is
the opposite.
Was very old at that point.
And it's fun to watch some early Joe McHugh because he doesn't realize he's a gimmick yet, so he's just doing regular ring announcing. So he's like, "Hey, my name's Joe McHugh," and then later he's like, "My name is Joe McHugh." So he kind of got it.
And he got a pop every time he did it.
Right. I certainly did. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
So All-Star Wrestling, which was the other show, and you said you really couldn't pick that one up in your area. You had to do the Rabbit Ears gimmick, and you had just kind of like listening to it on the radio. And that was taped at the Fieldhouse in Hamburg.
Yeah, and it was, it was definitely a B show. It was almost like, okay, the Championship Wrestling, if you got that, you got everything you needed. And then the All-Star Wrestling was just like, okay, here's another hour.
And what they did was they taped their promos all day. They all came in that one day. They taped all their promos all day long, well, most of the day. And then at night, it was time for the matches. And they would tape 3 TV tapings, and we get like one big main event dark match.
And I've talked to people who have attended those, and they said that the dark matches were basically a joke. They would always be a non-finish, and they would be over within 5 minutes every single time.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I'm sure everybody just wanted to get out of there. I've been to some shows in my time. Now there were finishes because they didn't care. They weren't on TV. But, the matches were short. It's like, all right, here's your match we promised. We're heading out of here.
Yeah, that's exactly what I am told it felt like. And really, anytime you went to the Boston Garden, you had that one last match at the end of the night. Usually it was like a feature match, let's say Andre or Patterson against a heel who was on their way out. That match would go by pretty quick, usually.
And back from like 73 onwards, or 72, 73 onwards, when they changed the championship and all-star format, Vince McMahon took over as the lead commentator on both shows. And I say lead because he was joined for several years here in the mid-70s by Antonino Rocca, who was a legend in the New York market going back to the 50s and the early 60s with Miguel Perez as a team, and even by himself. Antonino Rocca could do no wrong, and I'm sure that's probably why he had the job here, but he didn't really mesh well on commentary. It's like kind of here to tell back in the old day of the pre-talkie movies, the silent films. Some of the people didn't really move over too well. Their voices didn't really move over too well. And I felt like Rocca was great, in his time in the ring, But I don't know that he was necessarily the right choice here for the color analyst in the 70s. Is his accent very thick?
I mean, he was very difficult to understand, and you just can't have that on commentary. I think if they wanted to give Rocca a role, which they should have, I mean, he was that big a deal, and if he was, he, from what I heard, he needed the money. So, I mean, make him Jose Gonzalez's manager or Victor Rivera's manager or something like that.
Yeah, definitely a superstar in his time in the ring, but just didn't translate well here to the commentary booth. But here's the thing. So we go back and we heard those sound bites during those Executioner matches with White Wolf and Strongbow and all that nonsense. Antonino Rocca is on commentary still at the end of October of 76, but I don't have anything that I can prove that he was there anywhere beyond that point. It seems like he disappears after that. Can you confirm that? Did he leave somewhere around that time frame, or is it all kind of sketchy?
If I recall correctly, he was doing it until he died. Again, if I recall correctly, because I remember them doing the announcement that he had passed away, and it felt like he had just been there. So, I mean, either he was doing it not long before he passed away. I'm pretty sure of that.
Okay, I just can't seem to find any footage from like the beginning of 77 to confirm he's still there. I mean, obviously we know he's still there during October of 76 due to that audio at the very least. And he'll even work as a special referee on a February 17th show in Staten Island, Putski over Kamada in the main event there. So he did a match as special referee just a month before his passing.
Yeah, and you know what? That really would have been a good role for him, to do that once a year or once every 18 months at like Madison Square Garden. I think that would have made a lot of sense, but as far as I know, they never did it.
So the average TV back then, and we'll take you guys through this really quickly, a typical episode of Championship or All-Star Wrestling would usually be 2 matches, then you would get a ringside promo, and then usually about another 3 matches, usually about 5 matches would be on the show. So you get about 5 matches, lengthy squash matches usually, and then a promo somewhere right in the middle. I mean a ringside promo with the fans there. I'm not talking about the other localized promos.
Right. What they did on Championship Wrestling in Boston was they would have 2 matches, and then they would have a segment that went 5 or 6 minutes where it was nothing but interviews for the Boston Garden, and then you would have 3 more matches to finish off the hour. In New York, they had 6 matches, so there was a match that aired in New York every week that did not air in Boston, and they would have the Madison Square Garden promos distributed throughout the show.
Right. Okay, so that's cool to know. I didn't know that it was different based on the city. I just assumed the localized promos were interspliced here and there throughout the episode everywhere, and clearly that's not the case. And very cool to know. New news for me here as far as the Boston market goes. Very cool.
Yeah, they would only do interviews during that spot where we wouldn't, New York had that 3rd match, but then during the matches, you would have a voiceover of either Vince McMahon or Howard Finkel talking about, hey, don't forget there's a show coming up in Boston, or don't forget there's a show coming up in Malden, New Bedford, Concord, wherever.
Right, and we'd get those Finkel voiceovers going into the 90s. They would still do that.
Yeah.
So talk about the big shows. Let's talk about Madison Square Garden and things like that. The Garden was the first building to have its events televised on TV as far as HBO and then later the MSG network goes. You guys, Boston didn't come into play until like 85, right? Boston Garden didn't get TV till 85.
No, May 1985 was when Nesson first started airing the monthly or usually monthly shows from Boston Garden. I think that was just kind of a Nesson needs programming when the Red Sox and Bruins aren't on sort of thing. But yeah, and that lasted until 88 or no, early 89 that it lasted until.
And I believe they ended Boston and Philly the same month. They
did.
Yeah.
And Los Angeles as well. Los Angeles started airing the shows from the wherever the Clippers played in 88, and that got pulled in early 89 too, and that's because the WWF was blaming their declining attendance on those shows being aired, kind of ignoring the fact that even in the markets where the shows didn't air, attendance was way down.
Yeah. Of course, Los Angeles, the Z channel. That always sounded
The Z
cool.
channel, that's
always
it.
sounded cool.
And the Los Angeles Sports Arena, that was it, not the Forum.
Okay. So the Garden had the MSG, I should point out, not Boston Garden. They had their shows going on. The first show was back in 73. It was televised, but here we are. We're in 77. And wouldn't you know it, the man who makes his debut at the January 77 show as the ring announcer is the Fink himself, Howard Finkel.
I did not realize that he did his debut January 77. To me, I felt like he'd been there all along, but that sounds right.
Yeah. Actually, I was just watching the Garden show when I started my 1987 project in the WWF over on the Grenade show. And the January Garden show, they actually give Howard a plaque for 10 years with the company in 87, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I think that it was cool that they honored him like that. I mean, Howard would sometimes be the brunt of practical jokes,
Yes.
like at the Christmas parties and everything, which I was like, okay, this guy's been with the company for 20 years. He's a loyal, he's been loyal to the company, and this is how they treat him. I guess there's two sides to that coin.
Here in 77, they actually expand their television as far as the house shows go, though, as they'll be making their debut on the Prism Network in Philadelphia with the Spectrum shows. That's going to start here in April of 77. So now we'll have the Garden and the Spectrum doing live shows.
I mean, the world is changing thanks to cable TV, and I mean, wrestling is going to be changing dramatically due to cable TV. And yeah, cable. They needed that inventory. I'm sure it was popular programming. I mean, I certainly would have watched it if I lived in New York or Philadelphia.
So the structure of the house shows back then, mostly preliminary matches. Let's just say a lot of the smaller towns and things of that nature had about 6 matches on a card. Some of the bigger shows had maybe 8 matches on a card. If you were lucky at the MSG shows, you'd have something like that. But the structure of the house shows back then, lots of preliminary matches. You'd start off with the Jose Gonzalez versus, fill in the blank here. I'll let you run down a few but it built. It slowly built. Then the next match might be SD Jones or whomever, and it would just continue to build until you got your semi-main event and your main event.
I mean, I liked, and it's what I grew up with. It's what I'm used to. If you went to a show, like TV was just this really good guy against this guy who stunk. Then you go to the house shows, and it's like, okay, the guy who never wins on TV versus the other guy who never wins on TV. Who's going to win this match? I was always intrigued by that. Give me Frank Rodriguez against Steve King. I just want to see who won. So I like that kind of stuff.
that would definitely be something like, ooh, where does this pecking order begin and end? Yes. That would be, you're right, though.
Yeah, I mean, and you weren't going to get that on TV. Neither guy was a star, but okay, this is how the show starts. You're an opening match guy with an opening match talent.
And a lot of people think that the whole A and B show thing started with Vince. Well, we'll call him Jr. here, Vince McMahon Jr. A lot of people think that whole A, B, and then eventually C show too, Vince would do. But really, you would see it back here in the New York market. Back in the 70s, there was the A shows and the B shows, depending on the week or the day or whatever.
Yeah, on Saturdays, they would typically run 2 shows. Usually, it would be one major arena and then one smaller arena, but I mean, I did notice that, Boston, they would run Boston and then they would run another major arena on a Saturday night. And this is why, they drew well, so I can't complain, but, or criticize too much. But I mean, they would have some really thin shows at the Boston Garden. Like you'd have that one main event and then it would be like all lower card guys.
And I figure they just wanted to get as much as they could in it being a Saturday in the big markets. Maybe even if they don't sell out, they'll do well enough to where it was worthwhile, rather than throwing a show on a Wednesday or something. I don't know. I'm throwing things against the wall. I have no idea, but
it was. I mean, Saturdays in the late 70s and early 80s for the WWF was a license to print money. I mean, some territories would be doing cartwheels. Oh my God, we drew $100,000 house. We've made it. WWF would draw $200,000 shows on one night. I mean, it's my home territory. I'm not, putting it over because it's my hometown territory, but it was the territory where you made the most money. It's where everyone wanted to be.
So we'll talk a little bit here about MSG and something that they would do back in this time period when Vince Sr. still worked with a lot of the other territories. he would bring in these guys for what I would call, I don't know if they had another name for it back then, but showcase matches. Essentially, they would bring guys in from other territories and they would showcase them here in the New York market. And I don't know, was there a reason to this? What was it, just for the publications, the magazines, to get it out there, to have the name out there to say that they worked MSG? Was it Vince's way of kind of checking out the talent? This guy, can I use this guy in 6 months or a year from now?
I don't have an official explanation as to why it happened. My guess is that, number one, the wrestler would be honored to wrestle at Madison Square Garden. It used to be that, I wrestled Madison Square Garden was the equivalent of today I wrestled on a WrestleMania. And they would usually bring in guys who were either the promoter's sons, or in some cases rumored to be the promoter's son, or just someone who a promoter held in high regard.
Right. And it starts off here in January, the first appearance, to my knowledge, of Pat Patterson showing up here in New York, billed as the North American champion, much like Bobo Brazil's U.S. title. Pat Patterson scoring a win here in January over Baron Cicluna. Now, what Pat does different than a lot of these other guys as we go through this quick list here, Pat actually works a couple of house shows besides the Garden. He works Sunnyside Gardens as well as a show in Albany.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that happened, but I do know that when Patterson was brought in 1979, he was brought in with the understanding that, Pat, here's where you're going to retire. You're going to have a place in the office. You're going to help us book. So maybe that was just their way of getting to know Patterson a little bit better, or meeting him even. Right.
Yeah. I mean, what a booker, that guy. Oh my God. That's definitely somebody to have on your team for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And supposedly Patterson was way better at, telling guys how to parcel out a match than he was creating a program.
Learn something new again. So Pat wasn't the only guy who made his Garden debut here, or at least appearance here in January of 77. You talked about promoter's sons. Greg Gagne shows up here with a win over Johnny Rodz.
Yeah, Greg Gagne, not exactly a WWF type, but Verne Gagne was a big deal in the Northeast in the 50s and 60s. So based on that, bringing in his son for a one and done makes a lot of sense.
Mil Masker shows up with Mask here in February for a win over Doug Gilbert. He will return full-time, or at least semi-full-time here in the fall. So we'll touch a little later on Mil Mascaras, but also some other names coming in here. March, we see Don Kent. I'm sure Chief Jay Strongbow had pulled some strings to bring him in. He's looking for another feud with Don Kent here this time. Yeah. Don Kent comes in and does a draw on the undercard with Jose Gonzalez. Not really sure what that was about, but also a rumored to be promoter's son, as you talked about. Gino Hernandez shows up in his one and only WWF appearance, Gino getting a win over Johnny Rodz.
Actually, Gino worked a couple of TV tapings. I'm not sure what happened.
Yes, you're right.
It felt like they were going to bring him in, and then something went wrong. Someone told me once that he just wasn't exactly a hit in the dressing room.
Imagine that.
Yeah, really. A 20-year-old Gino Hernandez. But we had mentioned that there's been a rumor out there that Paul Bosch is, in fact, Gino Hernandez's biological father. Right. It's a rumor. I don't believe it, even though there is a little bit of a resemblance. I just think that Paul Bosch saw something in Hernandez and pushed him, but I don't think it was I don't think he was Bosch's kid.
Yeah, and I've heard so many people profess that they know for a fact he is, and I've heard equal amount of people profess for the fact they know that he isn't. I guess we'll really never know, and we just got to pick and choose what we believe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's wrestling. There are always all kinds of rumors out there.
And really with that rumor, it's kind of like flip a coin with me. If you're really hard selling me on that he's not on that day, I'm probably going along with you. And if you're really hard selling me that he is on that day, I'll probably go along with you as well. It's like, really, I have no idea. It's hard to say.
Yeah, my guess is that he isn't, and that the wrestlers who wanted the push that Gino got in Houston were just like, oh, it's this kid, no wonder.
So, yeah, I can only imagine, like you said, like a 20-year-old Gino working MSG. He gets whatever he wants. He's already working Japan. He's doing everything, down in Houston. He has to have no filter, you'd have to imagine, to a degree. He's already got everything to his head, and now he's working in New York City. I could see him coming into a TV taping after that, and maybe not sitting well with some of the old timers or the long timers here in this territory.
Yeah, I could certainly see a Gorilla Monsoon or a Chief Jay Strongbow being like, okay, why don't you just send this guy home?
So we fast forward another month into the Garden. There's 2 shows at the beginning and the end of the month here in the month of March 77. And who appears on both of those shows? I think this is his debut here up in New York. The American Dream, baby, Dusty Rhodes coming in here.
Dusty Rhodes, yeah. And I remember Dusty being on TV. It was like he didn't even have time to do like the regular tapings like everyone else. They would just like send up a tape from Florida and here's Dusty Rhodes.
Lots of Dusty Florida squashes air here on TV throughout the year of 77. It's a good point that you made there. And Dusty, though, gets wins here, back-to-back wins in March at the Garden over Pete Doherty and Tor Kamada. So Dusty comes in, and even though he's like a one-shot deal, we see guys getting wins over undercard. Johnny Rodz, poor Johnny Rodz, he was too talented for his own good, putting over a lot of these guys. Doherty makes sense in that spot as well, but Dusty over Tor Kamada, who was fairly, decent, on the card. Obviously, he's like floundering around in that mid card. I don't really know where to put him, but Dusty Rhodes, you're coming in just working a show, and Dusty won't be back until the fall, and you're scoring a pinfall win over Tor Kamada here. So obviously, they had some plans for Dusty.
They aired that match on television a couple of times. And again, to me, it stands out. Like Dusty, they're building up Dusty Rhodes to come into Madison Square Garden, okay? And this guy can't find a Tuesday where he can just fly up to Philadelphia or Hamburg or wherever they were taping, Allentown, and just put in that work. It's like, no, I was in Madison Square Garden. Here's the tape. Roll with that.
Yeah, and that's basically what they did. They didn't really argue with it. I mean, that's just how big of a star Dusty was.
It really, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, but when they had superstar Billy Graham versus Dusty Rhodes for the WWF Championship, I mean, that was a dream match in 1977.
So we roll on. Dusty's been in the company now. And then in May, what an odd name this one is. I'm going to try to pronounce this properly. A fellow by the name of Ron Mikolajczyk. I think I said that right.
Ron Mikolajczyk.
Lojczyk. Okay.
I'm
not saying it again. I'll let you. Now he was in the Giants, wasn't he?
Yeah, he played for the Giants, and I think he played in the World Football League for the Memphis team. So he was trying to get into wrestling. He did some spots in Memphis. It just didn't catch on with him. Frankly, I don't know what he was doing at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, that one really threw me off because I only knew him from the name from Memphis. I know he was kind of a buddy with Jerry Lawler, but he comes up here, and I guess it was just because he had come off of his run with the Giants. It's the only thing I can come up with. That he gets a Garden match here, scores a win over Gas House Doug Gilbert.
And it wasn't even like he was a big name with the New York Giants either. So
right.
I don't know. I can't explain that one.
Yeah, that was an odd one. So it's heavy early on in January through May. We've got guys being showcased left and right. Then it starts to peter out here. We move on to August. August 1st, 2 Garden shows in August. August 1st, it's Carlos Colon coming in, friend of Gorilla Monsoons. And then at the end of August, Verne Gagne, the father of Greg Gagne, comes in. And Gagne clearly demands to work a real talent here, scoring a win over Nikolai Volkov. Don't give me Johnny Rodz. I want somebody bigger than Johnny Rodz. I want something with notoriety. Gagne scoring a win over Volkov, but Carlos Colon comes in too. And who does he beat? Johnny Rodz.
I mean, to me, Nikolai Volkov was near the end of his run in 1977. So it makes sense. But usually it was a Johnny Rodz or a Frank Rodriguez that got fed to the guys who were coming in to be showcased.
So as we move on, I should point out that the president was not always Jack Tunney, believe it or not, for people born after 1980. Back in the 70s, there was a fellow by the name of Willie Gilzeberg, who we kind of mentioned back in the title stripping there, the tag title stripping. He'd been a former boxing promoter in his early days, became a wrestling event manager in the Newark area, began working with Jack Pfeffer and Toots Month for the talent on those shows. And he caught onto the business and very business savvy. So naturally, enter Vince McMahon Sr., who had recently secured a TV deal in the New York market with his father, Jess McMahon, now deceased. He didn't really have him to lean on. So Vince needed allies in that New York market, having been stationed in D.C. prior to that. For those who don't know, the WWF really got its start in Washington, D.C. And Vince Sr. joins up with Toots Mondt, Johnny Doyle, Phil Zacco to create Capital Wrestling Corporation. And that was right around 57. So Gilzeberg slides in as a trusted confidant of one Vince McMahon and plays a mediator of sorts, issues between the owners as well as the wrestlers, other promoters. So Gilzeberg played an interesting part in the company, and he would join Capital Company and begin promoting shows mostly in New Jersey with the WWF talent. So he was a figurehead, but he also played a much larger part behind the scenes than like Jack Tunney did with the Canadian office.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know everything about Willie Gilzeberg, but what I do know is that he was a good ally for Vince Sr. Like he knew people in the television industry, and he was very helpful to Vince Sr. in that regard. And that's why Vince Sr. gave him that, figurehead role as the WWF president. I mean, the guy was in the Madison Square Garden program every month.
All right. And before we get to talking about some of the talent here, I wanted to talk to you about some of the referees, the other talent in the ring. And that could be a hard job in itself. Back then we had Dusty Feldbaumer, Dick Kroll, Dick Worley, Willie Weber, Jack Lotz, John Stanley. Who were some of your favorites to watch back then? Or did you even pay attention to the referees? Because I always had a favorite at any given time.
I always liked Dick Kroll for whatever reason. I got to meet Dick Worley in the 80s, and I was just fascinated by that guy. He was something else.
Dick Worley, another guy who looked older than he actually was. When the first time I ever got to see Worley from his 70s footage, I would go, man, that guy looks 60. And I went and I Googled it years ago, and I looked up how old he was, and I don't remember exactly how old he was, but he certainly looked a lot older than he actually was. He was in really good shape for a referee as well.
He was.
And he was my favorite from this time period, Dick Worley. And I'm not sure if Gilberto Roman was doing anything at this point. I don't know. That guy's fascinating. How he had a job for as long as he did. And Gorilla Monsoon always used to bury him on commentary like the most incompetent referee of all time. But I got to throw him in there. I'm not sure when he came in to the company, but just another referee. But my favorite of the time, Dick Worley. And it's kind of funny, your favorite was Dick Kroll. And I'll tell you what, when you're a kid, you don't see things the way you do as you do when you're an adult. So there's probably guys you appreciate more now than you did then, and vice versa. There's probably guys you love then, and you go, man, what was I thinking? But Dick Kroll was one of those referees for me. As a kid, I just thought he looked kind of clunky, kind of dorky. I didn't really like. I was like, it's this referee. But as I got older and I saw all the matches that he was headline referee in MSG many a time, and I go, you know what? This guy really knew what he was doing in there. So I have an adult appreciation for Dick Kroll, where as much as a kid we used to laugh and kind of make fun of him. Look at that bald referee, whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean the referees, they were like school teachers. Like Dick Kroll was like kind of the laid back school teacher, and Dick Worley was the school teacher who was always yelling at everybody.
I love to meet Dick Worley. It's unfortunate, that he aged out by the time everything changed over, but I mean he was stationed in that area. I don't see him going national.
No,
could have been wrong, but
I saw him refereeing a couple of shows in New Jersey, a couple of indie shows back in the mid-late 80s. And, he was just a commission referee.
All right. So now we begin the talk of some of the talent here. And we're really having a great conversation here, John. We're running a lot longer than I expected through the early part of the notes. So I don't know if it's okay with you, and it's up to you. I'd love to have you back. Whatever we don't finish here today, I'd love to have you back for another episode.
I'd love to do another episode. I would love to do part 2 of this.
Oh, excellent, because this is probably going to take 2 parts. And so I think a really good closing point here, because we got a lot to cover on him, a really good closing point here for this very first episode of the Regional Rasslin Podcast, John. I want to talk about Bruno Sammartino and his last bit of a run here as the WWF champion going into 77. Bruno, the champion, at least for the first 4 months of the year.
Yeah, and it was, it was business as usual. You would have Bruno, he defended against Stasiak in Madison Square Garden. Now it's time for him to defend against Stasiak in Boston. We still had Ken Patera matches going on. Let me see. In New York, he had Patera in January, February, I want to say. And then
March.
His final, what's that?
And March, 3 months.
Okay, yeah, that's right. And then his final successful title defense in New York was against Baron von Raschke in April. And like I said, it was, superstar Billy Graham came back, and at the time I was like, wow, it feels like he just left, and George Steele came back right around the same time. Professor Toru Tanaka came back as a single. So I'm thinking, okay, we're going to be seeing Sammartino Tanaka down the road. And that's not exactly how it worked out.
No. And we'll look at, we'll break down some of the bigger cities here and just look what Bruno did city to city, because it wasn't like, the 80s where Hogan had a storyline. And so he was working that guy everywhere they went. Well, mostly everywhere. Let's say Hogan feuding with Paul Orndorff most of 86 and 87. 99% of the time you were getting Hogan and Orndorff in some way, shape, or form in every market. If it was the Hogan market, I mean. And here, not so much. Bruno had his different matches with different people in every city. So, for instance, let's look at Boston. January, Bruno comes in, gets a win over Nikolai, one off again. February and March, Bruno Sammartino has the return matches with Stan Stasiak. I call them return matches from 73. So these are the matches we saw at the end of 76 in MSG. Now we're seeing him in Boston. Bruno over Nikolai. Then he does two matches here with Stasiak. February, Stasiak gets the win by disqualification. They come back in March. This time Bruno going over Stasiak. And then in April, we see one matchup, Bruno and Patera leading Patera. I think Patera does the job on a DQ there.
Well, what they usually did was, I'm not really an expert on Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, but in New York, they would have Bruno against like Ken Patera, and then they'd have that series. And as that series was ending, like 3 months from the time it started, it would start in Boston. Like Ken Patera would make his WWF debut in Madison Square Garden, getting a title match, whereas we'd see Patera on TV for 2 or 3 months before he got a title match in Boston. And usually he would have a match against a guy lower on the card, like a Victor Rivera, a Tony Garea, that type of competitor. He wouldn't debut against the champion.
So we look at the spectrum here. So like you were just talking about, we get these matches like this. Bruno again over Volkov. Over Bruiser Brody here in Philly, and Stasiak in January, February, and April. Nassau, for instance, in January, and I put this down just because of the match that it was. Bruno wrestles Bruiser Brody inside a steel cage here. That'd be a hell of a match.
It would be. And, Nassau is a really interesting city, especially in 1977, because the guys who did not get to wrestle Superstar Billy Graham at Madison Square Garden got their matches in Long Island. They would have Superstar Billy Graham against Chief Jay Strongbow, against Billy White Wolf, against Haystack Calhoun, against I think Gorilla Monsoon. No, that was New York. But again, I know against Haystack Calhoun, like that next level down where you're not Bruno, you're not Putski, but that's where the guys would get their title matches against Graham.
Yeah, it was essentially like the B arena in the New York City area.
Exactly.
So we get Bruno over Brody in a steel cage in January. Bruno comes back in February, March, and does 2 matches with Stasiak. So Stasiak's really still getting pushed here like he was when he first came back working those garden shows, the MSG shows in November, December of 76. Clearly, in the early part of 77, Stasiak still being pushed pretty hard because he's working Bruno in Boston, in Philly, at the Nassau Coliseum, or in Nassau. So Bruiser Brody, Stasiak for a couple of matches, and then in April, much like in Boston, it's Bruno and Patera in a non-finish again. So they're starting to feed Patera into the championship caliber level, even though we're really not going to see any more return matches because Patera's title matches are coming in April, and we know what's coming in April.
Yeah, and it was a little bit weird when the guy had another match in Nassau in Long Island after he had already lost to Bruno in Madison Square Garden. If you're in Long Island, you're getting Channel 9 on TV, so you're like, hey, Stan Stasiak already had his matches against Bruno and didn't get it done.
Other odd cities I was looking at, I thought this was interesting. Up in Landover, and obviously I'm covering Landover for a reason here as we begin 77. In January, it's Bruno again over Brody, this time in a lumberjack match. So Bruno was doing these matches with Bruiser Brody, but I noticed in some instances, even though these are gimmick matches, there weren't really first matches like to set up these what should be return matches. And I'm not saying that's the case in every instance, but there are some gimmick matches here between Brody and Bruno that just don't make any sense why they're happening. I'm not arguing them. If I'm watching them, I'm excited for them. But at the same time, just like, wow, they just went straight to this.
Yeah, that makes very little sense. They did that once in Boston in '82 when they had first match Bob Backlund against superstar Billy Graham is a Texas death match, but at least you could say, okay, well, they had the angle coming off TV to do that,
right.
Whereas Brody never did a television angle with Bruno. So you're right, that makes no sense.
Yeah, and that's a missed opportunity. They could have done something with Brody and Bruno on TV. That would have been fabulous.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, I thought, even as a kid, I'm like, okay, you got this Bruiser Brody guy who's like 6'7", or at least is being billed as such. Why not have a battle of the giants with Andre?
Yeah, absolutely. So we get Bruno over Brody here in a lumberjack match. Then they come back in February. Bruno over Torquemada, who wasn't really getting title shots on the big markets either.
I'm sorry, where was this?
This was in Landover in February. Bruno over Torquemada.
That's a match I did not know about.
So those were some of the other markets, but then we look at Madison Square Garden. 3 matches coming into the year immediately, January, February, and the first Garden show in March, early March, I think it was March 7th. It was Bruno Sammartino working a brand new talent, a brand new top heel by the name of Ken Patera, who makes his MSG debut at this January show. And that was commonplace. A lot of people might say, wow, he came right in and got a title shot against Bruno. They did that with a lot of their top heels. Instead of working your way up in New York, a lot of times you worked your way down the card.
That's exactly what happened in New York. Typically, a heel would show up. He'd do 2 sets of TV tapings, and his first night on the road in the territory was to wrestle the champion in New York City. I mean, and you're right. I mean, talk about starting out at the top.
So Patera makes his MSG debut, working the WWF champion, Bruno Sammartino, and defeats Bruno on a count out here after hitting Bruno with a chair as Bruno's trying to get back in the ring. Bruno eats the count out. So Patera gets the first big win here, which makes him a viable contender for a rematch. So we fast forward a month to February in the Garden. Bruno again with Patera. This time they battle to a double disqualification in a Texas death match. I'm not sure how you do that, but the referee goes down and the match ruled a no contest of sorts.
Yeah, the WWF, well, let's be honest, they really, it was a place where you had all kinds of crazy finishes, like, for example, the cage match is the first man who walks out of the cage or climbs over the cage.
Right.
You had disqualifications in Texas death matches. A lot of it just made no sense.
Yeah, I don't know that the WWF ever had one legit Texas death match.
We've talked about this before. A Texas death match, it's self-defining. In New York, it was just a match with theoretically no rules, even though the referee was constantly involved in the Texas death match, and the guys weren't fighting to the death. And, obviously you have the Amarillo-style Texas death match, which, the WWF just wasn't having any part of.
And so this is what I found interesting, because we know Bruno's getting ready to drop the belt anyway. And usually every challenger got their, if they were a viable contender, they got their 3 matches with the champion. And so we move ahead to March, and the third match, this is where the champion usually beats the challenger, but it doesn't happen that way. Bruno does beat Patera, but it's only when guest referee Gorilla Monsoon stops the match due to the blood loss. So we're seeing that again here. So Bruno never definitively beats Patera in this 3-match series.
One thing the WWF always did, the heel was almost never beaten conclusively. The whole time that Bob Backlund had the title, it was always like the heel had his foot on the ropes, or there was a special referee who wasn't exactly biased, or there was a blood stop or something. The heel always had an out, and I'm not exactly sure why they did that, but throughout the Bruno and Backlund eras, there was always a story behind why the heel lost, and whatever it was, usually it was the foot on the ropes, and the heel always had an excuse.
Yeah, I think wasn't when Bob beat Graham, wasn't Graham's foot under the ropes or on the ropes or something like that? So even when Bob won the belt, am I remembering that correctly?
You are remembering it correctly. Superstar Billy Graham had his foot on the bottom rope, and that's kind of what they based the rematch upon, that Graham said, hey, he never beat me. My foot was on the ropes. And there was a little bit of an irony, because Superstar Billy Graham beat Bruno using his feet on the ropes for leverage. Yeah. And then a year later, he once again, he has his foot on the ropes, but it doesn't matter.
So we get the 3-match series, though, with Ken Patera And we're coming to an end. We're coming close to an end here. But before Bruno finishes up as champion, he has 2 matches with Baron von Raschke, a buddy of his, I believe, once late in March 28th at the Garden, and then again April 25th. So the first time Bruno beats von Raschke by disqualification after Bruno winds up getting his leg tied up in the rope, and von Raschke goes outside and grabs himself a steel chair and commences to beating down on Sammartino. Obviously, you got to have your rematch then. Even though Bruno got the win, he wants that revenge, and that's what we get here in April. And that's Bruno this time defeating von Raschke, which sadly would become Bruno's final ever title defense in the Garden.
And that was something I can tell you right now I did not see coming. I mean, Superstar Billy Graham, I know in real life it was far from out of the blue. It had been planned for quite some time. Mm-hmm. But for me, I mean, it was like when they announced on TV that Superstar Billy Graham had defeated Bruno Sammartino for the championship. I mean, it was like lightning struck me, man. It was literally, I don't want to say all I could think about all day, but I was thinking about it all day.
So Bruno is the world beater. He's moseying along, beating Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, Stan Stasiak, a former champion. Ken Patera, Bruno essentially wins that battle. Baron von Raschke. We're in the middle of all of this, and then out of nowhere, it happens. You know what that it is, John?
I do believe I know what that is. April 30th, 1977 in Baltimore, Maryland, of all places.
The guy knows his dates. Just 5 days after that guard match with the Baron, out of nowhere in Baltimore, of all places, we have a new WWWF, see, I did it for that, heavyweight champion in the Superstar Billy Graham. And I think that's a great place to wrap up and package this episode, John, because everything moving forward, the world changes here in the WWF because we have not only a heel champion, but a heel champion that's going to hold the belt for more than a week or two.
It was the only time that happened until from the time that WWF became a thing until the Attitude Era. Superstar Billy Graham was the only champion to hold he was the only heel to hold the championship for a significant amount of time. And I'm aware of Randy Savage. I mean, he was a heel for about 2 months before he lost the title back to Hogan. So it was definitely a unique time. And my understanding is that, I've never seen the television, but my understanding is they had a show scheduled for the Baltimore Arena. They were going to have a battle royal where the winner gets to take on Bruno Sammartino, and Graham just comes to the ring and says, no, I don't want to be in the battle royal. I just want a title match. And everyone just kind of said, okay, which makes no sense, but that's my understanding of what they did.
Well, Graham was smart. Those battle royals can be dangerous in real life. You can break an ankle there pretty easily with the wrong guy landed on you. So he was like, I'm not chancing this for anything, guys. Maybe he really, in real life, maybe he walked back there and scrapped that battle royal behind the scenes. Like, I'm not taking any chances. I want that title because, the only thing I can think of as far as a heel title run beyond this, you're right. I don't think until Yokozuna, when he beats Hogan back for the belt in June of '93, he holds the belt till WrestleMania the next year. Yokozuna had like a 9-month run, which is still longer, whatever. But I mean, up until the '90s, you're talking a long, long time down the road between Graham and Yoko. So it's very interesting. I can't wait to talk about Superstar Graham and his run as champion here in the WWF here in the next episode.
I think we broke this down pretty well. We talked about pre-Graham being champion. We're wrapping up with that, and when we start again, we'll start with Superstar Billy Graham being the World Wrestling Federation champion.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the title change. We're going to talk about all of his defenses throughout the year. Lots of names to look at. So many guys coming into the territory. Chi Peter Maivia, Fuji and Tanaka will be back as tag team champions eventually down the line here. Dusty Rhodes will be back on TV feuding with Superstar Graham. Some good matches there in the Garden. Bob Backlund, he's going to be here all year, at least on our TV screen. Chief Jay Strongbow going to have to go into singles. We're going to talk about that injury to Billy White Wolf at the hands of Ken Patera. So much to cover next time.
I am looking forward to it. Like I said, it was my first full year as a fan, and I loved it. And I'm looking forward to talking about Superstar Billy Graham as WWF champion in 1977.
As am I, and I just absolutely love your vivid memory. You remember things, you remember the matches, the guys that were in the ring, the reason why this match happened. Maybe it's lost in time. Otherwise, there's no mention of it online. You can't find why this match happened, but there had to be something. And usually you can find that kind of information, but every once in a while you can't. I feel like you've done that here a couple times. I got to go back and figure out when they were again, but you've done that for me here a couple times on this show. Why? Oh, now that makes sense. Like Kevin Sullivan being written out. I didn't know that was at the hands of Ken Patera, so I learned something new, and I am glad that I had John here as a guest.
Well, Ken Patera was running wild, ending careers with his swinging neck breaker, and that's what kept things interesting for him because obviously, one thing about the WWF, they had one champion at this point. Once Bobo Brazil and that Air Castle United States champion disappeared, there was only one singles title, and if the babyface was a champion, the other babyfaces were effectively eliminated from contention. And when Superstar Billy Graham was the champion, guys like Ken Patera and Spiros Arion were effectively eliminated as challengers. But we'll get more into that next time, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, as am I, guys. I appreciate everybody. A brand new show, the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories, and that's what we did today. We'll be back with the other half of this 1977 project. It's been a hell of a lot of fun with you, John, and I look forward to talking to you again.
I am grateful that you had me on. Thank you, Ray.
Absolutely. For those listening on the Wrestling Memory Grenade, we will be back next week. We'll resume the 1987 project in the WWF. Anybody looking for this show here, the Regional Rasslin Podcast, talking with John McAdam about 1977 and so forth, as I go on with the newest addition to the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, you guys can continue to listen to this show on WrestleCopia.com or all of your favorite podcast streaming apps. Thanks again, John. This has been Regional Rasslin, where we talk the territories.